Imagine this. A hurricane is headed your way, something like Helene and Milton, and you've been told you've got to evacuate. It's a mandatory evacuation. You've got to find somewhere to go. So you start packing your stuff up. You start packing your family up, get them in the car, getting that car gassed up, headed out of town. Now you start searching for a place to stay, and you see the costs are really high, and these costs are going to pile up very quickly. But are they going to be covered by insurance? That's what we're talking about in today's video, so let's get started. Hi, I'm Chris, the flood insurance guru, and more than 12 years ago, I bought a house in a flood zone just like this right here. I was given the wrong flood insurance premium, I was given the wrong flood zone, and guess what? My cost skyrocketed. Well, you're watching this video today because you're probably asking the same question. Hey, how are my costs from this evacuation going to be covered? Or are they going to be covered? So let's talk about this real quick. Are evacuation costs covered? Well, in order to understand that, we've got to understand when flood insurance pays out. Remember, either 2 acres or 2 properties like you can see right here behind me, or inundated with normally dry water. You see me standing right here in dry land. If I had water around my shoes here and my structure here was damaged, remember, that's going to be defined as a flood. But it's got to have at least 2 walls and a roof there. So I've got to actually have damage to my property in order for a flood insurance policy to pay out. Now look, as I said, home insurance could be different here. Maybe it does cover something like that. We're specifically talking about flood insurance today. So flood insurance could potentially cover additional living expense, but in what situation? And we're talking about additional living expense. We're talking about hotels. We're talking about, utilities, things like this. Like we said, it's got to be damaged, but we've got to understand what is additional living expenses. These are things that you've got to have for a temporary place to live while your house is being repaired or even possibly replaced. But we've got to understand with the National Flood Insurance Program that they do not offer additional living expenses with their policies currently here in 2024. Maybe that changes in the future. So how can you get it with them? Well, potentially you can get it with them when there's been a presidential disaster declaration filed and you're having to file for disaster assistance. Then in some situations, temporary housing expenses could be covered here, but they're not currently covered under a National Flood Insurance Program policy. They're typically only covered by some private flood insurance policies. And remember, it's going to be a separate coverage. So if you're taking out a private flood insurance policy, you've taken out building coverage, you've taken out contents coverage, and you've taken out additional living expenses. It may say loss of use on there, something like that. Not all private flood insurance companies cover this. Now remember, each one of these coverages also has its own deductible. And typically, additional living expenses sometimes has about a 14-day wait before you can use it. So you want to think about that when setting up that policy. So this is when additional living expenses is available with the National Flood Insurance Program and private flood insurance. Now that we understand that, let's go back to our real question here is, how are these costs going to be covered? Unfortunately, when it comes to evacuation costs like this is going to be something that comes out of your pocket. So you want to make sure that maybe you're putting, if you live in this part of Florida, have some kind of emergency fund so when this happens, you can kind of step into that emergency fund. Just like having an emergency fund for a deductible or anything like that. Part of your disaster plan here should be to have this emergency fund. So when these things happen, maybe you have 3 to 5 days of living expenses put aside. So in this situation, you've got a hotel paid for, food, these types of things. Now, after the storm has hit, you might be able to get reimbursed for some of these things through disaster assistance once you go through that process of seeing if you'll qualify or not. Now, you can click on the corner of our video here to understand more about disaster assistance and disaster loans if you do end up having damage from that storm. I hope today's video, are your evacuation costs going to be covered by insurance, has been of value to you. If it has, remember, share, like, subscribe to the channel below. I'm Chris, the Flood Insurance Guru, and I look forward to speaking to you in our next video. Thank you.